Today's conversation, this is a touchy one. I think we're going to get a lot of engagement. Do women really want men to be vulnerable? Thank you so much for joining us again on Second Act TV. I want to welcome back Joni Caldwell Lerner, the host of Wake Up with Joni, and a motivational relationship expert. There, I combined the two this time.
I love it.
Joni, thank you so much for joining us again.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here, as always.
Today's conversation is, I'm looking forward to it. This is a touchy one. I think we're going to get a lot of engagement and a lot of opinion. I know I have a strong opinion on this, and we'll see what yours is. You and I actually haven't talked about this. And that is, do women really want men to be vulnerable? Now, I came across an interesting article on that topic, and it was written by a man. I have to say, I think he kind of hit it spot on, or a lot of it anyway, in this article. So that's what I want to talk with you about today. Do you want to say anything before we get started?
Well, I think that we both agree on the article, absolutely. And we may disagree a little bit on some of the points, but we'll see. It is a really powerful topic because I think it's misunderstood. It's deeply misunderstood. What does it even mean? Right. So we'll talk about that.
Well, let's start with that. For the sake of this conversation, how do you define that? What does it mean to be vulnerable?
Well, listen, let's start off with Brene Brown did a TED Talk. It's got something like 65 million views on the topic of vulnerability, and how she defines that is being wholehearted and authentic. That is vulnerability, not crying and, wailing and wholehearted and authentic. So I want that in a man.
Here, let's look at what he wrote here, that there are basically two types of men, and tell me if you agree with this. The stereotypes. Now, we're very much generalizing, but for the sake of this conversation, that the number one is the tough, old school, he writes here, unshakable rock, never cry, never show weakness, never complain. And number two is the more modern, more feminine version, letting out his emotions, admitting his weaknesses, and feeling down when life hits him in the face. So, two extreme differences. And he says, and I think I agree with this, that women kind of want a little of both. And again, that's where the confusion comes in.
Right. So a woman wants to know you can take care of yourself so that you can take care of her. Right. So and I love a manly man. I love that. That's, whatever. It's just what's true for me. But I don't want, a Neanderthal. I don't want a caveman. I want somebody who actually has feelings and is able to express feelings. Yeah. Okay, and let me try and clarify, because now it's like, well, wait a minute, didn't you just say? To be able to express what's going on for them, not to bare their soul and toss their heart onto the table, but to be able to say, yeah, I had a rough day, and I'm just trying to figure out how I can navigate that, and just feeling kind of crunchy, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
and
I like that.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So that's vulnerable, because the really manly Marlboro man is going to go, oh, feelings.
Yeah, he writes here about the two men that it's cracked me up, that when I was closed off and stoic, I became devilishly attractive, but my partner told me it was hard to connect, because vulnerability is supposed to help you connect better. I agree with that. But when I was vulnerable and expressing my emotions, we connected. But I could feel the vaginas drying up like a puddle in the Sahara midday sun.
What a great line. We go back to the definition of vulnerability.
Yeah.
Now, you can still be strong and powerful and manly and have a whole heart. That means, I love. So that is even more attractive. My vagina wouldn't dry up over that. long as we're using the word.
I thought it was a hysterical line. Of course, it was a man
Say it
writing
out
to men,
loud.
so I get it. He says that here's what women actually want. And so again, do we want this? That
Mhm.
they want to feel safe with you. They want
Mhm.
to know you can protect her no matter what. They want to
Mhm.
be sure you have your emotions under control, because if you don't, you're not capable of protecting her against life
Oh,
storms or might lash out against her. That's what we want. Is that good advice for men to read?
yeah. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I think so. I hope we've had some clarity in this conversation because it is very convoluted, and
Yeah.
we are women. We're not in a man's brain or body, and they do operate differently.
Well, this is about what women want. I mean, we're the
Yeah.
ones that either say yes or no. And again, we don't speak for all women. This is
Mhm.
all very so generalized. And I know
Mhm.
that there's women that are going to strongly disagree with my position, especially younger ones. And then others again, no, I don't want to I want a manly man, period.
Depending on things that have happened in their lives, they may feel
Mhm.
safer with a man who is less manly, and that's fine too.
It says here the bottom line, she wants to feel that you can manage your emotions and overcome what you're struggling with. And I agree. I want my man to, not that I can't help or be there for him by any means, but I
Mhm.
do want to know that he has the emotional capacity to overcome what he's dealing with. Is that being just selfish?
No, I love what you said though. And not that I wouldn't help or give him feedback or be there
Mm-hmm.
for him. That's not what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying I want somebody who has the self-regulation and the self-awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Now, this whole touchy-feely idea of awareness and vulnerability and for people over say
Yeah.
65, it may be really uncomfortable conversation for
Mm-hmm.
them to hear.
And that's why I wanted to have this, because it is for our generation especially. This is sometimes a hard nut to swallow because it almost requires a whole different way of thinking about the roles of men and women, which is significantly changing, or I should say melting
Yeah.
with the younger generations. So that in and of itself is to me is very interesting. He qualifies here that when we want them to be vulnerable and when not. So let me get your input on that. He says here she wants you to be vulnerable if you're sharing to connect and create intimacy. You take responsibility for your emotions. You process what you're feeling. You don't depend on her, but have yourself and friends to support you. I don't know about that one. You don't make it her problem. That's if he can do all that, then we want him to be vulnerable.
Well, so I agree with I think that was a little roadmap.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree with that. No one's going to do any of this perfectly, but I agree with you too that she can be a part of the scaffolding, but she's not the answer. She's not the dumping ground. She's not the therapist. She's not the
Mm-hmm.
mommy. She's not any of that.
Mm-hmm.
She's the partner.
Mm-hmm.
So I do agree with a lot of that.
Yeah. And just as you said that, I just see that this is, we as women have done that to men forever, that we dump, but we don't want it to do it, on us. And that's, I think, where the confusion and maybe some of the dissent in this conversation comes up, where that comes from
Okay.
is, anyway, that again, my opinion, I'm
A
only
double
stating my,
standard.
yeah, exactly. Double
Okay.
standard.
Yeah. So yeah, he's not your therapist either. He's not your daddy. He's not your answer. He's not, I don't care male or female. This is good
Mm-hmm.
advice for both sides in
Right.
terms of vulnerability.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Conversely, he says that we do not, she does not want you to be vulnerable. If you're emotionally dumping on her, you show no initiative that you're working on yourself. It turns into complaining, blaming, and whining. You have no support system in place. You make her your therapist or your mom, and you make your emotions her problem. Just the opposite of when we do want it, but re-emphasizing those points. And I guess that's, yeah, duh. But again, how do you put that into action? In a way, I agree with him that we
Yeah.
sort of want the best of both worlds. And how does a man do that?
Well, first of all, working on yourself, I think, is a really powerful thing to do. Mm-hmm. So if a person comes to, maybe the first pass, you get a pass. This is going on, and and the person's there and holds the container and emotionally and listens and heavy thought about whatever, blah, blah, blah. Then they come back and they have the same exact problem. And then they come back and they have the same, pretty soon it's like, sweetheart, this is the same exact conversation that you've been having for 6 months. I don't want to hear it anymore.
Right.
I've actually said that. And
yeah.
I get it, and I love you, but unless you're going to do something about it, and it had to do with, health or working out or something, something pretty innocuous. And I just said, I can't do this anymore. Yeah. I love you. And
and here, he ends it here. And I think, again, do you agree with us that the harsh truth that all men have to understand when it comes to vulnerability is that as a man, you have to use vulnerability sparingly, even if you do it right. That every time you do, you lose a few points of your strong, unshakable masculine score.
Oh, let's just make it even harder for him. Jeez. So he's not
this
wrong.
Is a man giving advice to men. So again,
he's not wrong. So first of all, he said all, which I always take exception to. So there's a balance. I think that the guys out there, if this resonates, pick and choose what makes sense to them, and see how it goes. Yeah. He's not wrong. That's all I can say about that. Yeah. I mean, honestly,
what's interesting is I just had a conversation with Dr. Gary Salyer on fear of intimacy. I'll link to that segment. And he's a he counsels people on this. He's in the practice of talking about this. You would think he believes in vulnerability, but he came right out and said, as a man, you have to, you dish it out in small pieces, because once it's out there, the women decide that this is not really what we. I mean, it's walking a tightrope. It really is.
Yeah, but I think it can be done. I mean, John does it naturally, or I don't know if he even realizes that he does it. It can totally be done. It takes awareness. So you stop, you look, and you choose. Stop, look, choose. Stop and see if it's working. If it's not, choose something different.
Yeah. And Paul is the exact opposite. He is that
very manly man
guy.
He's a very manly man.
Emotions just don't come into play. So I totally get this, because I have, I've been on both sides too. And from my perspective, a man who isn't quite so upfront with his emotions is more attractive.
Yeah. Well, and so all the boxes are ticked for you. So it works for you. There's nothing broken. There's nothing to fix there. So maybe he doesn't have to learn how to be vulnerable. Maybe he just finds a woman who doesn't care, doesn't need that from them.
Well, but here, this is why this speaks to me so much. It's because I do. There are times I do want him. It's like I wish he would just share his, be more emotional. I wish he would. And then I catch myself. It's like, do I really want that? And that's, I think, where we go. Again, I'm talking, for all women, which I can't. And I like people to weigh in on this. But when I really stop myself, if he did this that I'm saying or thinking that I want, how would I feel? And I wouldn't. I wouldn't like it. And I think it's that awareness that makes, for me, this discussion so incredibly interesting and important.
Well, now that we've thoroughly confused everyone.
It is confusing,
but even that's valuable, because you can, you know what I mean? We've gone back and forth and all around and hopefully answered some of the questions. I mean, certainly they've come up for us, but here's what I would say in closing. Here's what I would say. We as humans tend to do this in our perspective and our perception. We do this as we get older, but you don't have to. So just be a little bit more open. Just be a little open to, this is interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder about everything. You will find it, life is so much more interesting.
I'm going to share one last thing here and then we'll close, is that he says to ask yourself, he's talking to men now, these questions before you share something. He's like, why do I share this? Do I tell her because I want to connect, or because I'm looking for some, like why am I doing this before you share? Do I assume responsibility? Do I take the necessary steps to regulate my emotions? In a way, I can't even imagine a man asking himself that, but maybe that's because he hasn't.
Maybe he will now.
Maybe he will now. And do I still fulfill my masculine role if I do this? Do I allow her to feel safe and feminine with me? They're good questions. And maybe since we're pointing it out, that makes sense to some men. Again, I want your comments. I just personally, I don't see men stopping and asking themselves those questions.
I do. But well, no.
But you know what I mean? So yeah, you're right. We kind of went all over the board. The bottom line is, as we always say, is just treat others the way you want to be treated, including, men and women.
Yeah, no dumping either way.
But this topic is very important, because it really is part of a changing culture that's happening now. Maybe not as much with us, as I said earlier, but it is a changing culture. And it's, to me, it's a fascinating conversation. So with that, Joni, thank you again for your time and having these conversations with me. I always love talking with you. I will link to your podcast, which covers a lot of this stuff, in much more detail than we do here. And of course, your coaching information if anybody wants to get a hold of you directly. So again, thank you for your time. And I look forward to our next conversation on Second Act TV.
Thank you.